Chris, what's up? How you doing?
What's going on, Matthew? Doing well, doing well. Definitely seeing interesting trends in tech. Like, it's something we think about it, but it's something I see firsthand with my kids. Like, and the way that this affects their relationship with music, because like I don't really talk to them necessarily. I don't want to influence them. They know I have all these records, and I'm like this. I was this music guy when I was younger and everything, but um, you know, I know for a fact that the only thing they see is TikTok. They don't use the internet. I mean, that's like school. You know what I mean? Using a browser is like we're doing work.
What other? I mean, are they even using Instagram? Are they purely TikTok people?
Instagram is for your parents. Instagram is like for Karen to show her vacation pictures. It's Facebook all over again.
Yeah, or maybe if it's just like that's like for millennials.
Yeah, it's there for them. Like the the White Claw generation, the chill wavers, they're still using Instagram to like post their Toro y Moi sunsets. But younger kids and even Zoomers, like it's all TikTok and maybe a little bit of Snap, and that's it. Everything,
I'm
not just
surprised
music.
Snap
But
is still persisting because it feels like that was something that people were very excited about, and then just really lost a lot of profile. I think TikTok really ate its lunch.
yeah, it did because Snap was really bad at preventing bullying, harassment, and all that crap. It was set up for it. Snap was a stalking app, dude.
Of course,
And
yeah, God, everything about it.
Yeah, and TikTok is is a screen. It's a doom scroller, and that's all they do all day. If I don't stop it and get in the middle of it, they just doom scroll TikTok, and it's their filter for everything. Like I have a text. I didn't send this to you. I have a text exchange with my daughter, my oldest, and I asked her, "What are your three favorite songs right now?" And one of them is like a later Mazzy Star song that was in some show. The other one is "When You Sleep" by
Oh,
My Bloody Valentine, because it blew up on TikTok and it continues to blow up on TikTok in this memey way. So I asked her, "Wow, have you been listening to Loveless?" And she goes, "What's that?"
at least 1/11th of Loveless. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
I noticed like even just the other day, I was looking at the Spotify's like top songs in North America, and like one of them was a Steve Lacy song called "Dark Red" that came out like 2017. And I just looked into it, and it's just like it was just being used in fan cams and just kind of went viral on TikTok. But it's I don't know. I do like that we now have this machine that makes random things extremely popular. I mean, that's a nice little lottery system we've developed for the Steve Lacey's and My Bloody Valentines and Mazzy Stars of the world. And Pavement, for example, that's another one.
Oh
Um,
yeah, they got huge wreck in TikTok.
yeah, so it's like I don't know. It's also weird that like some of these things that are like these are like all of the things we just said. Those are actively cool things, and obviously lots of like not really particularly cool things get big there. But it seems like a cool thing has a better shot on TikTok than it does on the other major platforms.
Yeah, because of the way it's shared, the presence of the other personality, the authenticity of the person being your own age and the way they talk, all of those things. None of those data points exist in Spotify. And Spotify is not going to make it long term. These streaming music platforms are going to be rejected because they're not going to conform to the way kids are getting music and interacting with music. And I just don't think people realize.
So what do you mean by that? Like, what is like the active change that would keep people from like wanting to listen to? I think the beauty of a thing like Spotify would be that you can listen to records, you can listen to songs, you can listen to things on your own terms. Like, it seems like TikTok would be more like consuming things by listening to the radio,
It is in a
like a
way,
real
but like
weird
when you
radio.
well, it's a multi-dimensional radio, and that's the thing. It's the dimensionality, if that's even a word, of the way the next generation is choosing to absorb culture and information. So look at Epic Games buying Bandcamp. This makes complete sense, but a lot of people think it's weird. And I'm like, no, they just bought a library.
Yeah.
Epic Games just bought a library to put behind every game they have. They'll offer and incentivize Bandcamp artists to let their music be in their library.
Wait, so I have a question about that. So does this make it easier for if like Epic Games wanted to make their own rough equivalent to Twitch, that people using their Twitch can play whatever they want from Bandcamp? whereas Twitch has, that's to me one of the most obnoxious things about Twitch is that like the music is so heavily policed.
The DMCA piece, everyone hates it. And the thing that's nuts is for months people were expecting Amazon to buy Bandcamp for this reason, because they don't have a good deal. But if you've been watching the news the last 2 weeks, they launched a new app called AMP. And what it is it's a competitor to Green Room and Clubhouse, because Green Room is an attempt for Spotify to compete with Clubhouse. But it's tied into Amazon Music's licensing deals. So you can create playlists of songs, have your live chat like we're doing on the app with other people who only need an Amazon account to log into this thing. And you play music, but it's set up so that you become like an iHeartRadio DJ. You can't have the music playing while you're talking. It automatically ducks your mic. So there are ways that it's like
no bed music in this world.
Nope. And so it really feels more like kind of Pandora with talking in that way. But like at some point, someone's going to figure this all out. And it goes back to what we were saying about TikTok. People want multidimensional live streaming, chat, music, all at the same time. And they're going to want a way that they can flow fluidly between these different actions and reactions. And all these corporations are trying to figure out how the hell are we going to make this work?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what it seems like less than this being a thing that would kill a thing like Spotify or Apple Music or all these various streaming platforms is that if you do not give people these sorts of utilities for experiencing their music, then people will start losing interest. But, you know, X number of people will want like the classic Spotify experience, but you need to kind of venture out into different uses of these libraries.
Yeah, and I think the biggest issue that's kneecapping the number one and two. So I mean, Spotify's 31% of the entire streaming market is just Spotify. Apple and Amazon Music are like 11-12%.
Yeah.
The thing that is kneecapping all of these companies, streaming companies, is all the rights are already totally antiquated contracts that make no sense. And they're from like 2006, but they are not set up and they didn't anticipate the explosion of app use and mobile. So the contracts and the licenses with the artists are very mechanical in the old school way. And, people have been screaming forever about how nobody makes any money off Spotify. Yeah, they don't. But Spotify is in a really dangerous position because it can't just be plugged in the way Bandcamp could, because Bandcamp was built as a portal to bring you into a legal construct that is extremely fluid.
So about with Bandcamp and it's Epic Games, right? That's the company.
Yep. Fortnite.
Yeah. So it seems like this is just a massive opportunity for all these like largely independent or just straight up, just like not even signed artists that exist in the Bandcamp ecosystem. Because this is offering a level of exposure that just simply did not exist. There's definitely going to be at least some artists who are going to have like these exponential growths in audience just by virtue of being in this ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, this is so. I for like 3 years ago, I started I let my son play Fortnite, and I've been watching and even playing with him sometimes this game. Fortnite made $5.5 billion last year alone. It's just one of Epic Games' products. And they had multiple artist events. The biggest one by far was Travis Scott before the concert incident. Ariana Grande has a skin in Fortnite. Marshmello was the first one to jump on this, and I wrote an article about it. It's on my Substack. You just Google it and Marshmello. He was the first one. And he was like, this is it. They've got it. This has 250 million people live on it. And they create these packaged events where people log into Fortnite and they go into like a little lobby playroom and they watch Marshmello, or they watch a Star Wars interaction announcing a new Star Wars movie. All these very specific.
Oh, right, because they wrote that directly into The Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah. And they bought the Epic controls all of this. If you want access to this 250 million person baby, here's the rules. They are a fence for such a huge audience as long as they've got it in Fortnite. And it's the kid audience. the kid audience that's like tween, that's going to be like unabashedly wanting to be cool by emulating Travis Scott or doing the emotes and the Fortnite dances, versus say a teen who's much more sulky and like, I'm really into Mitski, let's say.
Okay, so another thing about the Bandcamp thing, that given the situation, I just laid out like the best case scenario for a smaller indie artist. Now here's the I think a not good case scenario, where suddenly all these major labels that have largely left Bandcamp alone, or just like only put their artist stuff there like in weird circumstances where they're trying to basically get like, you know, like more grassroots hype on something, like they're going to have to want to flood into this so they can be part of this party, right? So the chances of all of these major labels coming in and crowding out everything else seems pretty strong too.
Yeah, there's kind of two ways that can go, maybe. And the one that I've thought a lot about, like, I mean, I have tons of Bandcamp purchases. I'm a huge participant on the platform. There's so many great success stories. Their editorial has been just on a rip for 2-3 years in helping, you know, surface these artists. Like I was telling you about this artist in San Francisco, the Reds, Pinks, and Purples. This guy does kind of like, you know, Magnetic Fields, mid-90s blissy twee indie, and it's really authentic and people love it. But yet he gets to do like the clear vinyl edition and, you know, all those special things. The Bandcamp life cycle is like a very burned in thing that fans, or who are mostly record collector types, love. They love the way this works, and the artists are getting money. And I know, because I just released an album on Bandcamp by Kraus that is a limited edition CD that's, you know, doing the Bandcamp thing, and it's great. What I worry about is, you know, how when you go to like Target or Barnes and Noble and they have like the 180 gram vinyl reissue of In Utero or Taylor Swift, I worry that Bandcamp becomes like a way for merchandise opportunities in exactly that way. And
right, so for the most part, like these things like are get sold online through like the Universal Music Group store, but this becomes like one other place they can sell that stuff.
Yep, because it's got the active audience and the social buy-in, and people, you know, Bandcamp's always doing royalty-free Fridays, and it's very politicized in its marketing. I don't see how that can continue. So you got the idea that it becomes, like you say.
I feel like that can continue for participating artists.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, like you say, there's two concerns, right? Did this just become a library, a catalog for Epic to offer or pressure Bandcamp artists to participate in for their games, their lobbies, everything they do, or a streaming service, as you say, like a Twitch competitor? Or is this, they've got a really good vertical and we want access to it, and this is a great way to promote music and music merchandise, but also do tie-ins the same way we've done with Fortnite, and really try and blow this thing up in a way that it really sidesteps things like Spotify, things like Apple Music and Tidal. It's a totally different platform and approach, and that it's working because it's moving units, man.
You mentioned Tidal. Like, where is Tidal in all this? Because I feel like Tidal has no real like niche besides being, oh, that's the one that like the major label artists have put together. You know, I know, like, for example, like I have all those playlists and I clone the playlists to I always make them in Spotify. They get pushed over to Apple, and if they're not like crazy long, I'll put them on YouTube as well. And I've had people like, oh, can you put them on Tidal too? And it's like, well, one, I would have to have a subscription Tidal to do that, and like I'm not dropping $10 on this thing I'm not going to use. I actually do use both Apple and Spotify.
Yeah,
for kind of like different purposes, like personally.
That was the big problem with Tidal, is that no one needed another option in this market. They oversaturated the market. They also came in with really heavy aspirational marketing like Goop, or, you know, like they really went after, you know, the gold and cream luxury mentality, you know, super high def, master quality 24K 96 sound that no one needs in a mobile situation. But here's the thing that really I think about, you know, when I think about Tidal, I think about it's like the no phone gang. Like the biggest flex you can have in life is not having a phone. like think about what your life would be like. You'd have to be.
These are the Bose sound system people.
Yeah, like you'd have to be, or like I'm saying, it's if you think about ultra wealthy people, like the aspirational state to get to is where you literally don't have a phone. Someone has to contact you physically.
Yeah, or like someone else handles the phone.
Exactly. And Tidal is like that kind of a vibe to me. It really turned people off. They got some audio files, but like it's like the Neil Young Pono player.
Yeah. So what do you think happens with Tidal? Because I mean, obviously, it cannot really stick around in the form it is now. It seems like it's going to be one of those brands that gets passed around a bit, like how Napster still exists. Like all these brands, like
dude,
LimeWire just got rebooted as a. God, my brain is saying PDF, but it's NFT.
NFT, yeah. LimeWire rebooted as an NFT.
Not tremendously different.
No, but that's what Ryan did with the Pitchfork money. He joined We Knew, which is Beeple's NFT. It's like a huge. They have Louis Vuitton, Andy Murray NFTs. This is a big backed venture capital mega initiative, and the belief in NFT to me is so embarrassing for these people. Like 5 years from now, because NFTs are amiibos. That's all they are. They're Nintendo amiibos. And people want to pretend that they're part of, immutable blockchain, author certainty, transactional broker, like ledger, all this crap.
Right. I mean, I totally understand why a Ryan driver would want to get in on some kind of thing because I think there's a good amount of what's the word I'm looking for here? Sincerity to the desire to like, I want to see if we can find a way for artists to make real money in this new ecosystem that's kind of coming into being. But I just don't think that's how it's going to happen.
Well, it's the same thing that's always happened. They're not making money because of their music. They're not making money because they're artists. They're making money because they're famous. And that's why, Grimes can sell an NFT for a huge chunk of change because she's like has kids with Elon Musk and is on the cover of Vanity Fair. It's not her music; it's her celebrity.
Yeah,
and that's messed up. But it's always been like that. Like let's not like crucify the present or present day.
Right. It's like if it's not one thing, it's another.
Yeah, it's always been like this. What Kiss? Go back to Kiss, right? Like who's got balls in stores?
The thing I was just thinking about is kind of like okay, so there's always these people who can leverage their fame into these adjacent fame things, or like they get like some deal with like a designer, so you're like basically the designer's muse, and you're wearing like their stuff all the time, and there's like, and that's the thing where you have to have the right look and be famous, or otherwise it simply doesn't happen. For a good example is like Lorde. Like Lorde is obviously has some hits, but like Lorde now I think is more famous than a pop star. Like sure, her last record kind of flopped out completely.
Yeah, there's a bunch of examples,
but it hasn't really changed her standing. Is the point?
Yeah, she's still considered like an eminent, artist in the way that Saint Vincent is. Artists that are just known as, oh yeah, that is a musician.
That's a cool, authentic person.
100%, and that's their lane, and that's not easy to achieve. Most of the time, that's a place that like people who are already wealthy achieve, and it's really they just wanted that credibility. Like they already had the money.
So you could be like so you have to be like really creative and cool, and you can reach the same point that a nepo baby has from birth.
Yeah
sometimes the nepo babies also want what your Lords and St. Vincent's also have.
Well, who also has a new album right now? Animal Collective. They are the kings of this status. Like endless credibility, always revered as this, forward thinking, incredibly syncretic artist collective in the name.
Very anti-careerist.
Yeah. And, Vampire Weekend was like, the two of them are such an interesting track because, they kind of ended up in the same place to me, taking very different paths to get there.
Wait, so where do you think Animal Collective is now? Because to me, like that's a group that is like made a point of dodging all the more successful paths they've taken. I was actually literally just looking at, before we started talking, the set list for the show they played in Brooklyn last night, which I would have liked to have gone to, but now I don't really mind having missed, because like, oh wait, so you have a new record out, but you played like most of your set was like new unreleased material. Like that is a real, I mean, that's what you do if you don't care that much.
Right. And, you know, again, the question
like that's Muse first, you know?
Yeah. And who can afford to do that? Who can afford to do what they want and just be like, doesn't matter if the audience shows up, and then the audience likes that irreverence. And so it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy in like the Death Grips way. I don't know. You know,
I guess I don't really see like the connection to Vampire Weekend, which I think is almost the radical opposite thing, where Ezra Koenig is such a creature of like the industry. Like he's basically married into it, like on the highest levels. This really lives kind of a low key celebrity person lifestyle. Has, you know, his Apple radio show, like definitely, you know, signed to Sony Records now. Like when they play, they definitely play all the hits. You know, it's like I don't really see like necessarily where the similarity between that Animal Collective is.
So for me,
I feel like they have totally different impulses as human beings.
Sure. I mean, the point I was trying to make is that to me, the band is detached from the people who make music as the band. Where when Vampire Weekend started, this was very much Ezra's push, but he's just become a professional in the music industry. So the band is like a briefcase that he carries around and opens up sometimes. It's like,
right, like you know, to the point where like you release records like every 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah, and
no hurry.
And the record is like, he can call anyone he wants. He can pull any string he wants, and he can make an authoritative, convincing, you know, demonstration of an area of interest he has in music at any time. And
right. Oh God. I mean, God, it's like, to more to your point, like that last record, Father the Bride, the other proper members are barely on it.
Yep.
It's mostly him and session players.
So that's sort of all I meant, in the sense that the band is not really the band as it was when it started and it was all for one. It's just become this, it's like the Dead. It's like,
oh yeah, well, I guess that's probably like one of the key things that those two would have in common is this, they're like this kind of like taking that Dead thing and kind of make it into their own world, like just their own version of like what a jam band is. Totally. And I think Animal Collective take that in a more literal direction of just like, you know, really following that muse and chasing it. And like, you know, the show's always had some degree of improvisation. Whereas I think Vampire Weekend, it's more of an aesthetic, like kind vibe journey for him.
Yeah. I think of like Vampire Weekend is Touch of Grey and Animal Collective is like Grey Folded. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Or yeah, it's just like there's constantly in like, what's the really aggressively weird song they have? And that's not Dark Star. It's something else. Anyway, never mind. We don't have to get deep into that hole. But yeah, Chris Ott, let's talk about the media. We both have feelings about the media. So as you see the media now, as it's shaped by social media, by these tech companies, like as we're in the spring of 2022, like what temperature are you getting off of this?
Again, the big thing I see, you know, we talked about it a little bit earlier in terms of pop culture, but in terms of the structure of the media itself, I think that classic traditional news outlets know their number is up. And that's why Joe Biden is having TikTok kids briefed on how to properly talk about a fucking war. Like, yeah. Well, I mean, that's the world we're in, dude.
Right? Because what, you know, if we talk about like the classic news media, what does that really mean now? It means like the New York Times, LA Times,
CNN.
It means like a few, I think maybe like the Guardian, things like that, some like British things. You know, so basically we have like a few remaining big boys, you know, who have basically consolidated and they just eat up yet more things in the way that like New York Times, you know, they have like a whole podcast arm that basically just bought out This American Life and that whole operation. And then you have CNN, you have Fox News, you still have the TV giants, like you know, like ABC, CBS, no one really cares about their news operations. So it's really just the cable news ones.
I mean, the
I mean,
analogy
a lot of things that were hot for a while are just like pretty much dead in the water. I mean, I worked at BuzzFeed when it was a big deal, and now it's like almost like it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's literally an aggregation bot. You're not kidding. I mean, the analogy I would make is like there's a whole bunch of extremely politicized print newspapers. Let's say it's like the 1800s or right now, and they're increasingly politicized because their readership is dying, and the only way they get more readers and get more people buying circulation is to say crazier and crazier shit. And they're all screaming at the corner of, you know, think about downtown Manhattan, you know, in top hats. And, you know, one guy's over here saying that the president is like the Antichrist, and then the other one's over here saying all this crazy shit. And what neither of them realizes, there's this new thing called the telephone. Joe Rogan is the telephone.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so then we kind of move into that space. So you have like your mega popular podcast, and there's a whole long tail of podcasts that matter to varying degrees. You know, blogs have kind of like resurfaced, but more into like these like newsletter forms, and those have various levels of success. Yeah, then you just have like things that exist in streams that whether they're on TikTok or YouTube. I feel like YouTube still has like a fair amount of cultural weight, depending, but not necessarily in the way it did before. Now it probably more in like, you know, your general wackos would have more purchase on YouTube. Oh wait, one thing I think there's one piece I'm trying to get at. Like I haven't ever. Yeah, I mean,
let me just say.
And then you just have things like Netflix deciding, you know what, fuck the arts media. We'll just make our own. We don't need them. We'll just make our own.
Yeah, and that, you know, the burn rate on companies trying to establish streaming share is difficult because, you know, Netflix is Blockbuster. They're a middleman. And so that's why they've spent all this money on original content, because that's all there's going to be anymore. It's easy for anyone to rubber stamp and clone the Netflix model using cloud providers. And that's what Disney did. It's what NBC is doing with Peacock.
HBO Max for
HBO Max
and stuff. Yeah.
Yep. And it's like, so, you know, you can or can't afford to have all these. Once you cut the cord, your bill is sort of closer to what it was at cable now.
Just out of curiosity, like for your household, which ones do you have?
Oh, I mean, all of them. I mean, I cut the cord so long ago. I mean, HBO Max.
Okay, but you're going in on all the big boys.
Oh yeah, we got kids, man. I mean, forget it. I got all of it. Yeah,
you have children. You must have Disney Plus. It's the law.
Yeah, and I'll activate YouTube TV for as long as they can keep this going before they get run out of business during football season and the Olympics, and then I turn it off.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say here, one quick thought I had, and I think it's germane to what you were saying. When you think about media, you know, and even thinking back to when you're at BuzzFeed, right? You start working an idea. You're shaping a story. These kind of behaviors traditionally. You develop expertise and authority to like a kind of certain level that means that you can write something meaningful. And then this becomes a pitch and it has its life, and we run this story in the New York Times, on Pitchfork, on BuzzFeed. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. If you have expertise, you triple down on that and you become one of the big key voices in a niche. And I'm thinking specifically of folks like, so you think about someone like David Turner and also Sherry Hu, and they have become essentially analysts for themes that you would previously think about being like a column in Pitchfork, right? This is the music business column. No, they've built like their own authority, and they're considered like consultants in demand for what does Web 3.0 mean to my brand? They're going to go.
And I feel like that there's some really big obvious examples of that. People who got in early on analyzing like crypto.
Yeah, totally.
God, I can't remember. There's one woman's name. I actually listened to a whole interview with her recently about like, God, it was on like the long form podcast, which I have a love-hate relationship with. But but like it's the idea of like, you know, you just get on this, if you're lucky enough to get anything early, and God, like my whole life is basically getting in on early on something at least maybe twice and then benefiting from that. And then but yeah, it's like, so yeah, so you become like the person that like, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. I also have some experience of that, of being a consultant, of being someone who's hired,
Yeah.
like, oh, this person knows what they're talking about, even if like, maybe you don't totally, but enough for to satisfy answering questions.
And that it's just such a better model to
Yeah.
specialize yourself as
Yeah.
an
I mean,
authority
you
on.
have to have like, for one, the interest and savvy to do it first and to kind of create the position. And then you have to have like the wherewithal for the hustle, which is, I think those two things don't go together all the time. So, like David, I feel like is a very lucky confluence of those two things.
I guess I think that I feel like it's just that authority thing. Like he's already a good writer, right? But then he starts developing like really authoritative content, and it just bends the will of the the vertical or whatever it may be that he's speaking to, that all of a sudden, because he's able to interpret and offer such leading edge commentary, it just makes it impossible for him not to be kind of a driving voice. And I mean, taking it back to music, we've talked about it. I've talked about it with everybody I've ever known. There's no other Anthony Fantano. He's the only one that did it to this level. That's sort of weird.
I got really into Todd in the Shadows recently, and I don't know, like, I mean, he seems like successful, maybe not on the level of Fantano, but it's like
he is. No, there's no question.
I mean,
there's
Todd,
a few people.
It's funny because I think the funny thing is I didn't really know that Todd in the Shadows existed until very recently. So I've just been like devouring all of his stuff, and I mean, I really like that guy. I think he's really funny, and I think he has like interesting taste. But I mean, part of the reason I didn't even bother to look for a person like that is because I didn't really like Fantano and just was like, oh, I guess they're all going to be like him. So, I mean, it is kind of the difference between, I think Fantano would, like, if you're going to do like a pop, like a music writing analogy, it's kind of like Fantano would probably like, classic Pitchfork energy. Whereas, I think Todd in the Shadows is probably closer to like a Maura Johnston.
Yeah, that's a good analogy for sure. And I think, it's just a question of scale, right? I mean, he's up for, Todd in the Shadows is up for like 500,000 subs on YouTube. That's a fantastic success. And like, if he's able to balance that with kind of a regular job, that's meaningful augmentation to, his finances.
From what I can tell, I think that's just his job. And he's just not like the kind of person who's like needs to be necessarily the richest guy. It seems like he's probably, this from what I can tell, it seems like he's kind of happy with what he's got.
Right. And I mean, I definitely agree. That's the vibe I get. But if you think about other people, like years ago, there was the kid, Oliver, who was doing deep cuts. He was absolutely caning it in his real life to become like an actual traditional journalist or whatever. So I'm just talking in terms of the model, right? Most people either have to be, as you said, kind of, hey, I'm down with apartment life and low finance, watching my money, et cetera, because this gives me the freedom to not have to deal with a horrible job. But you also have the opportunity like, hey, I'm at an age and I have so few responsibilities that I can actually build up a meaningful little pocket income stream. That's something I love doing and still have the time to do my real job. I mean, that's what I was doing, but I couldn't put like even song clips on my videos or they were getting taken down. And, I'm way too specific. I was never going to have an audience, but when you put all that aside, the amount of time it takes you to be on YouTube as a creator is unsustainable for 99% of people.
Yeah. I mean, I think about,
again.
I mean, I think about all this stuff, like, from my perspective of having, done, largely the same thing, but at a different point in history. Like Fluxpod is now 20 years old. So we're talking like 2002, 2003 is the origin points for it. And like there was no YouTube. There was no any of these things. Like I was just working with what existed at the time. And it really was like, what was the best case scenario for making money? Like having ads on the site and like how much is the ads going to bring? Not too much. So yeah, it's like, so I look at some of these things with, sometimes like a pang of like jealousy. It's like, man, I wish some of these things were around. Like the possibility of making a lot of or at least enough money to live off of any of this stuff was just not available to me.
Yeah.
So there's this part of like, oh man, and then like, but then like also like what the things that go along with it, like just relevance to audience. Like, I mean, maybe I should have tried to get into YouTube in like 2007 or whatever. Like, you know, maybe I should have. Maybe that would have been the smarter thing for me to do. I don't want to be on camera, but I mean, Todd obviously figured a way to sidestep that. But yeah, I don't know. It's like there's this part of me that's like, man, I missed a lot of boats where I could have like leveraged this. And I think, but it's also because like, oh, I'm just fine with how it is, and like, you know, I've managed to have like other full-time jobs, so like, I think the idea of not having to do Fluxblog as a job is appealing to me.
No, and I totally agree, and that's excuse me. I totally agree. I think the thing you have to consider is you're putting so many chips on the table when you're Fantano. Like, you're a public figure and you can't stop because you've got to sustain and grow this thing and make it so that it's taking care of you. Because otherwise, you know, what are you going to do? You're going to pivot and get like a huge job being an industry, you know, captain, you know, go behind the curtain and be like a principal at a record label or Rock Nation or something. Like, that stuff's always going to be available, but kind of, you know, I'm not going to name names, but I've seen people who were in these positions think that they were going to, you know, just slide on into some legitimizing big role, et cetera. And it's like, no, once you're working for a company, they really want to make sure that you're worth what they're paying you. And in that industry, man, it is really hard to justify yourself, even if they love you.
Yeah. I mean, I knew super early, like, oh, I do not want to work in the music industry.
Me too, man.
I feel like that was obvious to me it was like 2004, like being like 23, 24 years old. Like, yeah, well, that's not a good direction. Like,
because being in New York, you know, like I was working at People Magazine then, and I would meet like record industry people, like big wig people. And I would just be like, oh man, this is just all a bunch of bullshit. Like, and the music's going to stop in 5 years. And then what do you do?
Yeah. I mean, I think you know, sometimes you just kind of instinctively know, even beyond like, oh, seeing the writing on the wall for an industry, like, oh, I don't really fit in with these people. These are not my people.
True too. Yeah. I always felt like every time I spoke, everyone in the room would just kind of like recede and be like, oh, this guy's energy. Oh no. And yeah. I mean, that's fine.
I mean, but you know, so, you know, one of the things I did end up doing was working at BuzzFeed in that time. And I worked at BuzzFeed at a time where it was like very experimental and very much about trying to understand how the internet worked and how to get things to people and how to make things that people wanted. And, you know, and that all really appealed to me, and it appealed to like kind of like the art school part of my brain, you know?
Oh, that's a good point.
And, you know, I think like this kind of getting back into media from a different angle, like I happened to be there and like, when I was doing music stuff, and I was just doing like, that was like the transitional phase of my career, like doing the music stuff, but at BuzzFeed in the first 2 years I was there, so like 2012, 2013, bit of 2014, I think too. But this is all like maybe a little bit ahead of where the music press would have to go a little bit after I stopped doing this stuff. So I basically learned all these lessons of like, okay, so if you're trying to do music and arts coverage on the scale of social media, everything has to move towards the most famous things or these super strong emotions, or it has to be about some other topic that's in connection, whether it's like the music industry or like your mental health, or, you know, all these other things that you can kind of attach, like all these things that people are interested in on a larger scale. And like the music can just be kind of like part of that story, but it's not the story. And, you know, so those are all the things I was doing for like 3 or 4 years, not three, but like 2.5 years, and like working with other writers and doing this stuff. And this, you know, and then this kind of getting pushed over into the quiz thing, and that become like my whole life for a while. But all the while seeing, you know, your Pitchfork and all the other publications have to make these adjustments as they realize, okay, there's the audience of people who are just coming directly to our site is like drastically diminishing. The only way to get people is through social media. The only way to get people on social media is through basically like luring in the most people possible, and that's how you do it.
Yeah, it was. And I mean, the other thing is,
and I should also say, from the perspective of 2022, even those tactics are huge diminishing returns.
Yes, they are. And, you know, we've seen so many of these things happen. I mean, you and I both lived through the absolute, like, laying waste of the pivot to video minute, and how many people lost jobs, and what a complete disaster that was across not just music, but all, you know, media.
Right. And that's ultimately just a result of Facebook specifically being capricious and, you know, seeing like how Facebook works now, is I worked there for a little bit. It's like, oh, so it's just kind of working the same way as like BuzzFeed or any other tech company works, really, is you're just kind of like, okay, what if we do this? You have some external factor that you get nervous. You're like, okay, so what else can we do? How can we pivot? So, you know, but when you're Facebook, like your pivot has to make everyone else pivot or it doesn't work.
Yeah. And sorry, I keep clearing my throat, man. I've got a tickle. I think, you know, not to extend it in a weird direction, but I'm just like looking around my house and, you know, seeing pictures of my kids, and I'm like, so many people, there's always adversarial relationships between generations, right? There's always, you know, oh, you're such a boomer, or, you know, the Gen X thing, and, oh, you guys had it so easy, and, you know, you had the best economy in the world, and, you know, born on third base, and we hear all this stuff. And with all the social media stuff, I'm just like, how do you keep this separate? Because when the internet started and we were using it, it was like a toy, and it was fun, and it was totally unreal. There were no consequences to being on the internet. But now it's like your company is totally aware if you are massively online.
Yeah. Yeah, I think especially within the past like 4 or 5 years, where like your fate could just change completely in a day or two.
Yeah, and it's also like there was a guy who shared a meme. I don't remember. He's this older gentleman.
Wasn't he? I think it was L'Oreal or one of those kind of companies, and it was just like
something like that,
right? And it was just kind of like it's basically, you know, like a racist meme, but like I feel like racist is not quite the right word. It's like it's racist in his use because it was like had the N word in it.
I think it was asterisked out, but anyway, the point being, that is so insane. That guy's pay package was $10 million, Matthew, and within 24 hours, he was walked out the door, and he's like an older guy. He's like he's younger than my parents, but.
Yeah, you know, it's like an older Gen X guy, and it's just like, why were you playing with that fire? Your life was fine. Why? Like I remember, like because this came up on Street Fight just had like this mini series of apologies, and this is one of the apologies that came up. Like this guy, oh, I've worked in this industry for many years. It's not what I'm about. But it's like people are just going to his Instagram. It's like, oh, it's all like memes. Like, why are you as like a 57-year-old guy just doing a meme page? Like, what is that about?
Yeah. What's the hole in his life? And, you know, the thing for me is, and I've said this, you know, before, it's like, the thing for me is you get to a point where you're just like, I can't use this thing anymore. Like this thing creates so much anxiety. I feel like there's an increasing amount of anxiety around using the internet and even using phones. Like everyone is realizing how tracked and trackable they are.
Right. And also, like, hence what you're saying before, like the ultimate luxury is being a no phone guy.
No phone gang, baby. Yeah, because like I don't need this neurosis. I don't need this paranoia. You know, the sense that someone is going to be able to take something. And this is the other thing. They can just make it up. It's so easy. There's websites that help you make fake tweets. And
Yeah. Well, I think
like, see it.
even beyond some bad actor or you making some kind of stupid mistake, you know, if you're just plugged into these feeds, whether it's Twitter or TikTok, whatever, Facebook, all of these, maybe not all of them. I think it's actually easy to have a totally chill time on Instagram, depending on who you follow. But the point being, like, these become these anxiety machines. Like, you
Yep.
can drive yourself absolutely crazy, especially as like the number of, you know, dark things start accumulating in the world. So, you know, first you have the constant climate change, you have the pandemic, you have Russia and Ukraine. Like, you know, these are things that are worth being worried about, of being interested in. But I think like these, having like this machine that just create, like, kind of pushes you towards hysterical anxiety all the time is good for no one besides the people who make money off it.
Yes. And this is kind of a left field comment, but are you aware of the Try channel? It's like BuzzFeed in Ireland.
Is it like related to the Try Guys?
No. So the Try channel is like Irish comedians doing, like, you know, reacts vids and drinking disgusting shots and things like that. Anyway,
Okay, so I guess it sounds like it's probably like a spin-off or something to do with the Try Guys. But yeah, anyway.
if it is, I don't know. I don't know the whole history of it. I just know that there's a couple of really funny comedians. One of them isn't really on it anymore. He was like, I thought he was so funny and so deadpan. But I mention it because one of the 20-something women that's a big featured name on this, her name's Justine Stafford. She has taken the position of being extremely, revealing of really significant struggles with mental and physical health that she's had her whole life. And her perspective is to just make this a topic. And they had a podcast once where she was talking about, like, oh, everything you do online is you're essentially doing a comparison or a judgment of yourself. And it's this judgment machine, but it's a judgment of the unknown, because the internet's anonymous. So you hear the messages and the noise, but it's not real. And that dread.
It's funny, like one of the biggest records of last year was the Olivia Rodrigo record. And like, I think there's like 3 songs that hit that idea from different angles.
Sure, because think about what she deals with.
Exactly. But it's also just a record that's like for teenagers to relate to. And like, yes, that's it. Like, you're dealing with the judgment machine.
Totally.
You're born directly into the judgment machine. You're not just like a judgment machine is created in your lifetime.
And, you know, Mitski is back, and she's essentially like recovering from this really horrific period where those signals all went absolutely nuts on her. And
I think even beyond her, it's like that whole cohort of female singers, like Phoebe Bridgers and what's her name, like Clairo, like all of them are now on tour or playing shows, and like their audiences, which have been like blown up by TikTok, is like full of like maniac TikTok people who are just being like completely rude and like screaming inappropriate stuff through the shows. So so even if like, you make some sensible decisions as Mitski, like you go out on the road and in some way there they are.
Yeah. And, I have seen a couple of articles, discussing exactly what you're saying. And at this point, I just look at this as a theater, as an arena that I don't want anything to do with. Like, it's so weird. And the thing that's weird is that I know there are plenty of people who are rational actors and get it. And who think about things the same way you and I did when we were in our 20s or whatever. But they're just so immediately and totally drowned out by this crush of performative people whose boundaries are truly like skewed by having grown up with the internet.
Yeah. Or everything have everything about it being performative. I mean, the artists we mention are also this is happening because they are specifically the artists that are used on these platforms as these indicators, these signifiers of sad music. I am a sad girl. I am a sad person. Like, this is my sad music. And like, which always kind of rubs me the wrong way. It's like, there's tons of sad music. Like, how did like, Mitski's not even like, I don't even think like it's tremendously sad. It's just like, it's, a lot of that music kind of has much more, either more complex things or it feels more numb. But I guess like people do conflate numbness and sadness a lot. So Phoebe Bridgers often feels numb to me more than sad.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. It's rude to talk in terms of analogies. I don't mean to reduce Phoebe Bridgers to anything. For me, watching what's happened with her, to me, it sort of feels weirdly like a manifestation of the movie A Star Is Born.
Wow, yeah. It's social media Star Is Born.
Yeah, and it really, like, the whole way that she is framed, the whole way that they framed Billie Eilish. Like, Billie Eilish was a project. They were doing remember this, the annual interview with Billie Eilish that they would do? Same interview, 5th year. Vanity Fair, which owns Pitchfork. It's all Condé Nast. They were right there at the beginning with Billie Eilish, and they were like, we are the Billie Eilish machine. Like, we're on this young woman for the whole way through, no matter what happens.
Vanity Fair bet on the right pony there. Geez.
Oh yeah, they did. And I mean, it would have been like, if Grimes Claire was somebody who was interested in that and saw the value of that, she could have done something similar.
But if she was much younger, came at a different time. She's got my problem.
Maybe. I mean, I think
but you know what? I could always just marry some billionaire.
Yeah. Well, the choices aren't available to everyone, obviously. And Billie Eilish came from a very structured, like the relationships in her family and stuff, things that made this much more safe for her.
I wouldn't really say like Billie Eilish or Clairo are like totally Nepo babies, but they definitely come from like worlds where there was a lot of wheels are greased.
Oh no, and that's not I wasn't making that insinuation.
Oh, no, but again, but yeah, there is kind of like this structured world that she's coming from. That a lot of these things happened,
which is to the point that she's not being taken advantage of by Vanity Fair. This is transactional, and so for that reason, I think that's like relatively okay versus getting chewed up and like vacuumed into what we've been talking about this whole time. This advertising-driven commodification and politicizing of all activity online by advertisers. That's the problem.
Hold on. Let's move into advertising. Chris Ott, let's talk about advertising, how advertising fits into this whole world, and also just like the way advertising has had to change to make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have seen a world go from print and television advertising to web advertising, which took forever for companies to trust or want to deal with. But then,
or even see as a viable thing.
Yeah,
even at a large scale.
As soon as the corporations got comfortable with web advertising's kind of porous data points, and they're like, it doesn't matter, we have to throw money at this. Then the investment came in trying to improve and continually refine and optimize advertising, digital advertising, and now it's ad tech, and it's the biggest space there is. It's not talked about by the kids that are, and the people that are.
How would you define ad tech?
Like, Google owns search on the web. Well, no one's using the web anymore, so Google's really sweating. Amazon has a massive embedded ad tech platform, and ad tech is okay. This is not just, we're not talking about advertisements. I'm talking about customer information. How long did they look at? Did they move their mouse? Session capturing instantaneously, milliseconds. Everything you do is turned into very pliable data, and the strength and gravity of that data gives more confidence in how and where you invest in advertising.
Right. And I think, like, obviously one of the biggest things that's happened in the past couple of years is with Facebook, of having like Apple, which controls like a large portion of the phone and laptop market, deciding, we're going to make it so the users can just decide not to be tracked. They can opt out of these things. And obviously most people do. And so Facebook's like a large portion of their model is just like has its back broken in an instant. And now, moving towards, so much of that company now. I mean, I'm right now I work like, not, I don't actually work for Facebook. I work for a staffing company, but I work there on like what's the word? It's like on commerce stuff. So it's like commerce tools and like, the process of checking out and stuff like that. But that all of that exists as a result of this. So that there's different ways of bringing in money that don't involve ads based on tracking people across Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, whatever. So it's So I mean, I bring this up not to mention what my current job is. It's not really bragging, but like, because like this is an example of like even like these huge, like the biggest dogs in the game, they can have like their luck run out just with one thing changing. And like exactly what you're saying with Google. So if search becomes less of a thing, I don't think it's going to like go away, but it's like not what it was. Maybe not a growth thing. What do you do now?
You and I have the experience of the search engine wars, and that's the flavor of technology. Always has been, always will be. But when the search engine wars now become like the social audience wars, all of a sudden we're not elbowing for a share of some likely new pattern. We're literally shifting audiences around. Like we talked about streaming, applications, segmenting intellectual property and rights by the owner. So the technology piece is sorted. Like I'm a record label. I don't understand, because there's not as much money. This hasn't happened to the music industry yet. It doesn't make sense for Matador Records to make their own app and firewall all their music inside it away from Spotify, but
right.
They could.
It also just like breaking music up into like different label libraries doesn't make sense to how the vast majority of people interact with music.
Exactly.
Having like the stuff from Universal Music Group not be there, but the EMI stuff just makes people look at the product and be like, why would I use this? I want to listen to like the Beatles and Kanye West. But or whatever combinations of people you want to say. Like, whereas I think with TV and movies, like people are like, okay, like it's really more like TV channels, and the TV channels have what they have, or even if you kind of break into like the Warner properties versus the Disney properties, and that really kind of breaks down to a Coke versus Pepsi thing. Like Marvel and DC, the Pixar versus Illumination or whatever, this becomes Cokes and Pepsis, and music doesn't really work that way. It's just like the value is having as much of everything as possible, which is where Spotify thrives.
I agree. I think one of the analogies there is that you urge in me is we tried this once before, and it was called FM radio, and there were rock stations and there were country stations, and then there were hip hop stations. Although we used the horrible term urban, I think you will recall,
yes.
A lot at that time. I
don't think we started phasing out urban until like the aughts, and like I think. Does the Grammy still say urban? I think they do.
They're, if anyone's going to be the last entity to still be saying it, it's them. So my point is this: FM radio was a technological walled garden. You couldn't just have FM radio different. It was such an enormous multi-generational undertaking to build FM radio. Well, now this is all one click. We're all riding the same internet pipes, and so. This is the thing that fascinates me. I've never sorted it out. I don't have the answer. But music is intellectual property. We know that there's been massive buying and selling of songwriter catalogs, and we know why that is. Because in the future, sync licensing is really the only way you're going to make money. Because Marvel movies make $1 bajillion. And if I put Bob Dylan in the dramatic, opening scene of The Watchmen, in the future, streaming is only going to get bigger. Shows are only going to get bigger. And you and, others and I have talked about how weird it is that music currently, its greatest value to the publishing and royalty owner of that piece of art its greatest value is how it can lend authenticity to another medium, e.g. a show or a
Well,
movie.
I don't think it's always authenticity. I think sometimes it's familiarity.
True.
Like,
No, absolutely.
I think that
like
that's
50-50.
yeah. It kind of depends. It has different values, or music will signify some vibe or feeling. Like, I think it's really just more like what we're really saying here is that it's something that supports another piece of visual art. And that's not exactly a new thing between movies and TV and advertising. But yeah, it's I think the thing that's probably changed more is how this is how people relate to it in their personal lives, where it becomes like music is a thing you put in your TikTok. Music is a thing that you put on a playlist for a specific utility. The music that thrives now, especially newer stuff, is stuff that has a very clear utility. Somewhat a novelty factor. This has been the case with music for a very long time, but I think it's intensified now that utility is decided on a more atomized level.
That's such a great way to put this, and I mean, you should totally go long on that in another forum, because without getting into the technical and business type aspects of things that the people we mentioned before, like Water and Music, get into. I think in terms of passion for music and everything that we have known music to be in our lives, it is being it really is being absorbed and superseded by other technologies and other mediums. And it's becoming, just like you said, it's becoming like a colored pencil in an art case with paint brushes and chalk and pastels. And it's all of a sudden music is truly just an aspect of, or a comment on.
I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing. There's certainly ways this is valuable. It opens up opportunities. And I don't know. I don't know how much it changes things. So you think about, well, okay, in different periods of time, like, what is the value of music? Well, music is the thing that you listen to in your car. It's just the thing that happens to be on when you're driving, or you're taking a walk. You put on your Walkman or something. It's like music that's for running. Music that's for, you gets played at a prom. That gets played at a wedding. Gets played at like music just being like this. This accessory is, I think, it's always been the case. Like, when was it not the case? Well, there's a window of time where people have stereo systems at home. Bringing music with you is, besides listening to it in a car, is not really a factor. So you have this period in the 70s where people were like, I'm going to sit down and just listen to this record with my headphones on, or just like with speakers, and I'm just going to get higher. Like that's and that's obviously a huge boom time for selling a lot of records. And like, you also see, like, well, the things that thrived in that were things that probably wouldn't thrive in other periods of time. Like, I think Pink Floyd being the most obvious example.
Yeah, it's Pink Floyd.
Right. So it's like prog in general.
Zeppelin.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think Zeppelin kind of exists in more discrete ways, but you know what I'm saying? It's like that album rock era. And that's still like part of the art form. Certainly how people like make records still. That's not really going to stop. Like, every time people are like, oh, people only listen to singles now, it's like it's not going to change how people like want to make records. That's a completely different impulse. Yeah, like the idea of like, I'm gonna like record some songs as a body of work, I will sequence it, and this is an album. Like, that's just like a natural impulse of making things and moving on. I think a lot of people like really truly do not understand that part of the equation. That's just like a pragmatic way of working.
Yeah, I think you're right insofar that people are always rushing to say, it's changed, it's different, here's the new theme. But there's one piece of this that we talked about earlier that I do think is compellingly creepy with respect to music, which is that the way people are approaching and talking about NFTs, music could just all become NFTs. Because
how would that work practically?
Well, if a song is an NFT, if it's a non-fungible token participating in a blockchain of all music, This solves so many problems, Matthew.
Wait, but I think what I'm not understanding is like, how is that consumed? Does that change how it's consumed on a large level, or does it just mean like you're kind of like a Martin Shkreli and you're hoarding your Wu-Tang album? Because my understanding is that it's more like the latter. Like, I don't know how you would have like a hit song that is an NFT.
Well, no. So the NFT, the song as an NFT, as a legal construct, totally inverts the current paradigm. If you want to sign me, you have to buy my NFT, but I still own that NFT. And that means that unless we have all kinds of contracts that are immutably stored in this ledger.
Or if you want to buy me out completely.
If you want to sync my song on Stranger Things, the artist's power, like music industry people are full on talking about this and they're sweating bullets, dude, because the kids that want to push DeFi, decentralized finance, and Web 3.0, there is absolute meat on this bone. It's just a question.
Chris, this is like, coming from, just a historical point of view where, and also some kind of level of cynicism. Doesn't this seem like it's the setup for like a thing that one or two people, they're coming up now, like this thing works for them, and then the industry just finds a way to like just squash it or just be like, or reject it. It just seems like one of those things where it's like, well, we're not letting that happen again.
Well, right now, the way that people are comfortable with it is the way they're comfortable with everything. It's okay if celebrities do NFTs, but like if new artists who aren't famous yet and don't have bargaining power had been using NFT and just blockchain generally as a value and rights store to protect themselves and everything they've ever done, the leverage that gives them in the future if their songs become popular is honestly, it has no precursor. It really doesn't.
This seems like a thing that if it's going to happen anywhere, it's going to happen with rap.
SoundCloud rappers. Yeah. I mean, what's the somebody that's like that blows up quick, reaches out and gets a quick education on some NFT runner and they on-ramp themselves, into one. It's just going to take one example. I think this is what we're saying.
Yeah. But my feeling is like, I don't really see this as something that opens the floodgates. I think it's something that sounds the alarm, and the industry does everything it can to gatekeep it so it doesn't happen again.
That they're going to try, but
because there's nothing in it for them. They can't give up their leverage, or the whole system falls apart.
Well, you think about think about all the different organizations and righteously minded groups, nonprofits that have tried to protect the internet, right? And the Future of Music Coalition and all this stuff.
So I'm thinking of like, okay, what is the less incendiary, more likely path for NFT? And it seems kind of like the model where you have like usually an indie artist that's unsigned, but they're hot before they get signed. So they have the leverage to license their material as opposed to be signed to the label. So, I mean, we mentioned Vampire Weekend before. That's a good example of that. Or Arcade Fire was another example. They were licensing their music to merge. And
yep.
So like that model, that happens, not all the time, but enough that it's a whole thing that happens. So yeah, I think you just like create your album as an NFT that you then license in these different ways. Like that seems like a possibility. It seems like just kind of an outgrowth of that, but it seems like I don't know how you do that without leverage.
Well, you don't change the industry without getting the leverage, and that's what I'm saying. Like if there's a band or if there's a fabric of people who are big into DeFi and they're educating some clutch of musicians. Like, think about like PC music or something, a few years ago. If there's an artist that makes the NFT thing part of their entire, process from day one, we need that because we need to see what can happen if that's how you started out as a musician.
Are you like rooting for the artist to figure out this NFT thing?
Yeah, I am because I think, there's so much hand wringing and, claiming the moral high ground in arguments about how much and when musicians should get paid. And the whole reason is that this is a historically predatory legal framework of businesses preying on artists who don't have money. It's always been this way with the arts. And DeFi is a way that you can re-baseline and level the playing field and change those outcomes. It's not going to make you any more money initially, but when you start to think about control over what happens to your music and your identity, even I'm
thinking about how this is possibly useful for the kind of artists where, like, like this is, lots of concerts are being announced now, and you look at, I've been looking at like who's playing like this large venue like this summer, like, like Forest Hills Tennis Stadium, for example, and you're like, who the fuck's that? Like, I feel like I like have my finger on the pulse, certainly in terms of having done all of those surveys and stuff. So when something is like, what's that? It's, it can be like a little surprising. So there was one, I can't remember what it was, but it was like some guy who's basically like a deep house, kind of like an adult contemporary deep house artist. Huh. But it was one of those things, like, but it seems like those kind of artists who usually come up on through popularity, through pretty grassroots ways, this seems like the best. It seems like that's where this could really work, where sure. Especially when it's artists who they don't necessarily need to even go mainstream. They can just kind of like work within their own framework, and and then just, I guess, like probably the biggest framework was just dealing with venues and getting up through that. But you know what I'm saying? It's like it seems like a good place for like some of these artists to kind of have more control over it, but not necessarily want to ascend to a higher level. Or like, yeah, now I want to be on UMG.
Yeah, I think like artists with a 6-figure listening range, like it's a super sweet spot for them potentially. They could even reboot what they've been doing and start following this path. But it's funny, something you just mentioned reminded me, you're talking about having the finger on the pulse and all that stuff. And bands seeming to come from left field. There's one thing when we talk about marketing in the music business and the music industry. So we talk about how NFTs, right, could be this liberating and cool thing for artists, maybe. But there's something also that's specifically very real that I find super weird, which is that the definitions of things that we held and knew our whole lives will like totally be changed by a marketing campaign. And I'm talking specifically about the Numero Group. This campaign to reissue Duster, a completely like mid-nothing, aimless band that had no footprint. And I mean, I was like obsessively into this genre of music. I did a video all about post-rock and stuff. Like Duster just was nothing. And now all of a sudden there's all these kids on the internet who are like, oh man, I mean, of course, I know Duster. I mean, they're huge. No, they're not. What? Like Numero has put out a cassette of this record, and they're doing the same thing with Karate. I mean, Karate was like a local band to me in the 90s in Boston. They played every weekend. Like people were sick of Karate. I mean, I like them a lot. I think they have 2 incredibly strong records in their discography. The first one, and then like I think it was an untitled record with a drawing of a car on the cover around 2000.
I mean, to your point, like my understanding of Karate is like I know I've heard Karate a little bit. I know I've thrown them on compilations and stuff, but it's not like a thing I know well. But it's a thing where it's like, oh yeah, I'm aware of Karate. Like, and like I think basically my understanding was, oh yeah, it's kind of like a local band, like a popular local band. I think that's another thing. Like, the idea of local band is such an antiquated thing now, but things still are basically just like successful local bands. They're just, the terms are different now.
The only place right now where you still have that notion to me of that throwaway, like, oh, that's an X band. Like we would say back when I was a kid, like, Screeching Weasel, Naked Raygun, this is like Chicago bands, Jesus Lizard. It would be, like you say, targeting a region. The only place like that now is Philly. It's like, oh yeah, they're a Philly shoegaze band.
I feel like the regionality becomes more like social ecosystems online or different platforms where something might like become success, but like big successful thing on a platform, but maybe not the other ones.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like that kind of regionality is now logically more about technology than it is about like the physical thing of like I live in the same city as these other things. Like I mean, it's not like that doesn't matter completely. Obviously, there's, these, you still have scenes, you still have people working together. You still have like, or even just like, cities that have like music machines like Nashville or Atlanta. It's not completely gone, but yeah, I think, yeah, Philadelphia is basically like capital of indie rock in New York, in the United States at this point in time. That's kind of a moving target, but for now, that's what it is.
And yeah, if you go back to what we were saying before, about the platforms and how you just said, you just made a really strong point that it's not about, where you are. Sorry, one sec. You make a really strong point. It's not about where you are. It's about what you're on. Right. And so you have Bandcamp bands, and we talked about it before. That's a way to do things as a band, right? You're a Bandcamp band. You live in that ecosystem. And then, okay, well, what's the point of us taking on, like, working with a record label? Well, the only thing there is the record label has money and they'll pay to put your record out.
Yeah. Or they can like grease the wheels on other platforms that you don't perform well on.
So one of the things, the reason I bring this up is there was a thing happening that, we knew and we lived through, which was the period where suddenly PR was everything. And
would you say that's
tell
really
your
like
friends,
the aughts? Yeah. Like,
yeah.
What's the one with David? God, what was the really big one that was like, that had like Animal Collective and all that? Force Field.
Oh yeah.
The Force Field era. Like, yeah, I mean, yeah, sort of like, or Cornerstone, like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that was the sense coming out of, in the aughts and in the early 10s. It was like all about getting clutches of bands and promoting them and figuring out how to, get them big and blow them up. And then
right. And that is a sensible reaction to, Pitchfork, blogs, all these different things where it's much easier to kind of like wheel and deal your way through it, and just kind of like base a lot of things on relationships. And I feel like that is almost meaningless now.
Yeah, the days of like, I mean, there was this period, you got Golden Voice handling the live stuff. You got like, WME and all these other artist management things. And they're the hand that's behind the curtain, making all the choices and putting all the people together, making sure somebody says something in their interview and mentions someone or some band or some publication. Like the orchestration that was going on right before they sold Pitchfork was so messed up.
What year did they sell Pitchfork again? I can't remember.
2015.
Okay. Wow. That's a year right there. That is a turning point in so many ways. Is 2015.
Absolutely. That was the end to me. I mean, of so much stuff. I mean, it was already bad and kind of failing in 2014.
But like I mentioned the Street Fight miniseries about Apologies, and the guy Brian, I think this is the point that's going to stick with me for the rest of my life. But like, there is 2015 is the dividing line where if after 2015, no one can be like, oh, I didn't know better when they do something problematic. It's like, nope. Once it's 2015, like you don't really have the excuse anymore. Like the world had changed.
The paranoia.
And everyone knew it. Like I think 2013 and 2014 are transitional years where like this thing is like coming into being, but the world we live in now really starts in 2015.
Totally agree.
In so many ways.
And I look at, I've said this elsewhere, like 2009 to 2013 was the Bacchanalia at the end of everything that could have been fun and stupid and irresponsible and crazy that was enabled by the internet.
Yeah. This is actually a topic that I'm kind of getting into with like playlist stuff. So I already did like the Obama vibe shift.
Yes. Yeah.
The thing that I want to get to maybe in a few weeks is the idea of like the innocence of the viral internet. So the big things are like that can when you have your Harlem Shakes and Carly Rae Jepsons and Sighs and
Odd Future.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think Odd Future is kind of the dark end of it, but yeah, exactly. Like where it's just kind of where things are happening because of virality, but it's not like the dark, bad vibes that really just take over by 2015. And I think part of the thing that, because people don't really think about social media in terms of like, oh, this is just people. And like, well, what makes the social media like intolerable? It's like, well, when there's a critical mass of people where all the different types of people are there, and then you just get like the same thing that happens in on a macro level of society. So like, why does Twitter become intolerable? Because, you know, you're at the same party with all these other assholes. And the only ways to really have a good time on any of these platforms is limiting your engagement with people outside of those you want to have, you know, any kind of interaction with, or just like absorb. So, and I think that's obviously the reason why the push now is more towards like these more walled off communities. And I think that's going to become more and more the thing over the next few years in different ways. I think even in its own way, like TikTok is like this, because TikTok has such an efficient algorithm that it will push you into your own little niche where you only see the things that it has a very good idea that you want to see. You're not going to see random shit you hate on TikTok.
Yep, dude.
It's built to make sure you don't.
My college thesis was on how the internet will return us to basically a medieval state, which is you can self-select and opt in to communities that are totally walled off. It's like being in a town in Europe in, you know, right before the printing press. There are only so many books in this town. And so people in this town only believe and know the knowledge that's in those books. And that's how somebody who comes and travels from another town who has a completely different set of knowledge is like burned alive because they're a heretic. And I think about how self-selection, I mean, scholars have written books about this. There's so many people who've opined about this. I was a kid when I was thinking about this, and I don't have any, you know, ground shaking brilliance to offer on it. But what I see with my kids, dude, this is so crazy. Like the way they behave on a TikTok scenario or a Snap scenario or a group chat or a one-to-one chat, those are different voices, dude.
Yep. The code switching, basically.
And I'm just like, when I hear these things and I see these patterns, I'm just like, we all let this happen. Like, wait, I got people.
Do you necessarily see that as the bad thing? Because to me, the bad thing is everyone being in the same place at the same time. Like, to me, like moving back to the internet that I came into, where you just kind of found your pockets and you hung out in those. And I mean, especially when you kind of look at it, I was saying before, like, okay, you know, where you now have the choice where like, okay, I can have a version of this where I'm just hanging out with my friends and, you know, we have conversations, we share things we like, you know, we joke around, or, you know, these are my obsessive interests. I'm following David talking about the music industry on Substack, whatever, versus being on like the major platforms and you're just plugged into the anxiety machine. Like, I don't want to be in the anxiety machine. Like, I think if anything, I've come to see like a state of like heightened anxiety is kind of, and this is going to probably annoy people for me to say this, but to me, it seems like the less intelligent way of engaging with the world.
I agree. And here's a really good example that's very local to me. We've had multiple cyberbullying issues in my kids' high school. And what happened in every case, it was so insane to me. I felt like literally I was taking crazy pills. Every single parent starts screaming at the school, what are you going to do about this? What are the consequences for this? And I'm like, guys, you gave the kids phone. Like, the problem is you bought your kid a phone. What are you talking about? It's not the school's problem. Do you even look at your kid's phone? Do you read their texts? My kids' texts go right to a computer in the basement. I have all of them.
How many?
They're not 18.
How many people do that? Is that a relatively common?
No one does. They're all fucking idiots. I mean, Matthew, you wouldn't believe it. The school bought a fucking internal platform that is basically a facsimile of Facebook. It has likes on it. Inside the school's goddamn educational framework, there is a like box. And I went nuts. And people looked at me like I was insane. I'm like, you're training my fucking kid to use social media via schoolwork. Do you guys not see how fucking crazy you are? Like, and you get to the point where it's like, okay, I'm not going to be the prepper dad who makes a bunker in his backyard and doesn't let my kid have a phone, because then my kid's going to feel like a social pariah. They're the only, it's, you know, it's like the kid who can't have sugar cereals and has a sleepover and everybody's like, what the fuck is this? You know, like you are giving your kid.
And you also don't want to cut them off from the culture of their day. Like, I don't even have a TV. Like,
right.
No.
Exactly. Imagine if we had, like, I was dying because I didn't have cable. I didn't have MTV. I didn't have cable TV and MTV until 1987. That's way late. I mean, for a kid, I was dying.
I think that's where I got it, but I'm a little bit younger, so effectively different.
Because the FOMO.
So I have a question about this, like this. So I guess this is like, you know, it's kind of like you just have the Apple Chat, the thing. So you're just getting it into like on your computer, so it's just doubled over there. You have visibility into that account. Does your kids' knowledge of that, has that worked? Like, has that made them more mindful of how they behave, knowing that there's some monitor process?
I mean, initially there were some scenarios where it allowed me to figure out some things that were going on and bust them in a way, and that in itself certainly sort of straightened them up. But like, it's not just about that. It's also like they know they're not allowed to use Discord. Like, I have that blocked on our network. They're not. I'm more concerned about how they're trying to get around it, like playing video games and chatting in the game. Like, kids, that's all they do is figure out how they can avoid detection and surveillance by their parents. Even if they
that was the genius of Snapchat, because it was like a whole thing built on secrecy.
And now, I mean, the main platform, honestly, where most kids are doing stuff, and I mean teenagers, is Roblox. Because Roblox is like retro and cute to them and funny, but it's also got the chat feature. And because it's approved as a children's app in the Apple Store, you can get on there and do whatever the hell you want, as long as you're not being threatening. And so, like you said about code switching, I watch for them to start using indicators that we're going off this channel and we're going to another channel. And I'm like, that's not happening, guys. Like, you're accountable for everything you do because you're a minor to me. And I don't want to spend my time reading your text. I want you to feel comfortable swearing and saying that, you know, dad's being a fucking dick or something. Kids are going to say that shit. You can talk shit about whoever you want within these boundaries, but I'm still going to know about it.
I'm sure if you just saw something where like they were like crossing some kind of line, that's another place where you'd step in. That's not really what's happening.
No, and exactly. I don't want to be a surveillance state, a friggin' panopticon for my kids. I want them to participate in the real world. I want them to understand at the deepest possible level, the reality of that world. And I mean, obviously, my experience is somewhat instructive on the ways the internet can kind of go sideways if you're putting yourself out there. And they're going to have the freedom at some point. They're going to be out of the nest and they're going to do what they want. And they can maybe start a makeup TikTok or a perfume TikTok, and I can't stop them.
Right. Well, how old is your eldest kid right now?
Mid-teens.
Okay, so like, you know, there's a few years, but I think part of the idea here too is like, okay, this is how it's going to be as long up till, you know, you're 18 or whatever, and you just hope. This is like the whole point of parenting generally, right? Where you just like hope that, okay, I hope that this makes it so that when, you know, safety wheels are off and like, you know, I'm not observing all of this, they make the right decisions. They don't, although you always run the risk that like in the situation you have them in, they just go hard overboard and overcorrection.
Yeah. I mean, this is my job. Like this is, I signed up for this job. This is my number one job. My job comes second. And, you know, whatever little intersects I still have in situations like this with music and culture, that's like a distant 30th. And, you know, being a parent is, I have to know I have that. I'm doing that job. I'm showing up every day and it's not fake, and I'm making the time and I'm making meaningful time where possible. And I'm giving stern guidance on issues because they need it. And, you know, once you're doing that and you've been doing that for, you know, 14, 15, 16 years, you know, you do actually and I don't mean this to be a PSA for people with young kids, but like you actually do get to a point where you stop being scared and you start to see them as real people. And you're like, I'm still here. I mean, I've lost people in my life, a number of people, some tragically, some frustrating, you know, and avoidable. And that's just reality. And all you can do is just know that you did your best to prep them for it. And everything after that point, when they leave the house, man, out of my hands. Like, you don't ever drink out of anything that you didn't open. You know, all these things, we're way out in front. Like, don't ever let a guy say the following thing to you. If any guy ever says anything to you that comes off as pressure rather than just, you know, kind of embarrassing. Maybe he's sweating because he's like attracted to you or something, and he acts like an idiot. That's fine. That's cute. But all these lessons like that we didn't hear enough growing up, my wife and I, we're making sure these kids know all of it. Like 100%. We got to give them as many tools as we can to deal with the world.
So, okay, I think a good place to wrap this whole conversation on is kind of combining this with looking forward. So, you know, your kids, your eldest is they're mid-teen. What do you anticipate all of this looking like when they're like 24, 25? Like where do you see some of these things going?
I think the one thing that's very clear to my wife and I is that for the completely wrong reason, college is now the most important thing that you absolutely have to make sure your kids experience. Coming out of the pandemic, there's PTSD in the mail for every kid right now. And we don't even know what it's going to look like. They're going to be substantially fucked up by COVID. And so
I mean, just knowing what I do, I'm actually kind of surprised that you're going direction, because it feels like college is a thing that, because of what has happened and what is probably going to be happening kind of ongoing in some way or shape or form, it's like, it seems like college is very much a risk of becoming less of a thing than it has been in the past like 30, 40 years.
And a lot of people think this because, you know, all the information is online. It's not about the knowledge and it's not about the learning. It's about the social networking in real life, meeting and dealing with human beings.
Or having human experiences.
They have to.
It's basically like college as a framework for these things happening.
You mean remote work is remote work, whatever. You know, there's been changes and all that stuff. But
if the prospect of college becomes like this remote work, then I think then it becomes a question of like, well, if I'm not getting like this this more social element of it, that where a lot of the real value is, what is the point? What is, you know?
That's exactly why we've come down on it. The whole value of college is, as long as there is a return to, you know, sort of semi-pre-pandemic existence with vaccinations and cyclical behaviors that we start to predict.
Right. And the assumption that like another pandemic isn't like going to just slam in like 2 years from now.
Right. If there is the opportunity by the time they're ready to go to college to have a college experience somewhat comparable to the one we had, it is so much more important now. And it sucks because colleges are the most predatory, overpriced joke. It just gets worse and worse. And it's so unaffordable for almost
and it becomes
everyone.
More unaffordable as more of these colleges become super aware of the fact that they're kind of like young adult daycare, and they have to have all these accoutrements to make it a good young adult daycare.
Oh man, it's absolutely crazy what a different experience it is in terms of the focus on the kids' experience. Like, this thing is a theme park, dude. You're on rails from day one, and it's just a guided tour. And, you know, I remember climbing up train signals, and being like a foot from a freight train going by us at like 3 a.m. and like behind Skidmore College for fun. Like, I want my kids to have all the stupid risks and self-absorbed bullshit and, you know, fuck grownups and all that bullshit. And they just, right now, they can't, but they're not driving yet. So that will change somewhat. But I can tell you, man, kids that have access to cars and can go away, they're living in those cars since the pandemic. They're just driving all day.
Huh. Interesting.
They get 3 other kids in the car with them, and it's like, holy shit, this is like the TV shows we all watch.
It just made me think of the video for 1979 by the Smashing Pumpkins.
Dude, totally. And it's like, they watch all the old sitcoms. Like, for some reason, everything from our generation like is like Friends and whatever, and they all watch The Office. And these proxies for real life. And it's taken on such a, I mean, I'm sure there's tons of fucking academic articles and bullshit articles and editorials about this, but it's also just supremely obvious that this is proxy representation of normal, which they're not experiencing.
Yeah. Or I think even beyond like, having a job, but even just kind of like I think this is kind of a universal thing, is that when you're young, you're looking for some kind of life script, especially for like how relationships are supposed to work and like how a romance is supposed to go. So The Office is kind of pulling double duty there, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a training manual. I've referred to it as.
And it's funny because like there's been like some new sitcoms that have kind of emerged with some degree of success in the past year or so. And they're all just like straight up jacking the Office DNA. Like there's that show that's really huge. Actually, one of former BuzzFeed person, like Quinta. Why am I forgetting Quinta's last name? Anyway, she can just be Quinta now. She's that famous. Quinta Brunson. I can't remember what it's called. It's about school, but it's like the romance plot for her is straight up jacked from The Office, with a little bit of like the Parks and Recreation, Amy Poehler romance plot there. But it's like just straight up, like we're not even going to bring like that much new details into it. The only difference is these characters are black and the other ones are white. Otherwise, it is the exact same show. But yeah. I mean, this is not really new. Sitcoms are just like this.
Well, I think
a winning formula is a winning formula. But you know what I'm saying? It's like, I think like people want that life script. They want like this like work environment where the people work together and they enjoy their jobs and they're not constantly worried about getting fired.
Yeah, I mean, it was, originally it's Seinfeld is the groundbreaking thing, the show about nothing. And then I think the big driver that's had way more impact than Seinfeld is Ricky Gervais' original Office, because it injects the voyeurism and the slightly twisted, you don't have to suspend that much disbelief with the cringe in the original Office. It's like, that's so almost believable that my entire head hurts. Like the cringe factor it's without compare in the original Office. And so, cringe is definitely that's such a new thing, cringecore. But that voyeur piece of it, the believability and the affability of the scenarios has totally 100% flipped all like script writing and approaches
Have I ever mentioned my cringe theory to you?
No.
So like my feeling is that especially because this stuff is like so absorbed and loved by what we're calling Gen Z, and they're mostly the children of Gen X, I think that it's part of a larger thing of them absorbing a more Gen X approach as opposed to millennial approach, where humor is a bit more about not liking other people, for one, and then also just having like this reemergence of snobbery. And these are things that I think the millennial cohorts like really like,
oh my God,
reacted against. And it's not like some like thing where it's like, I think when people think about these things, these generational terms, they get like really caught up in the wrong things. It's really more that culture and people are shaped by the culture they're in and the time, and especially when the formative influences hit. But it's also a matter of like these pendulum swings. So if we go like 15, 20 years where the worst thing you can be is a snob, well, guess what's going to come back real hard and is right now? Snobbishness.
Yeah, and that dude is so observable in my life. Like I can't even tell you how kids are unapologetic about being rich. And
and that's one way of it, and that's but it's like all these things. There's so many different ways to be a snob.
here's one thing:
or just having like this, like I think like even just like these things, they encourage kind of like an old school Gen X version where it's just like, oh, I know this and you don't.
Yeah, and also here's the thing that I focus on because it's so instructive. Think about the way millennials have framed Ferris Bueller's Day Off as the most offensive movie documenting male white privilege, patriarchy, and all those, you know, those sort of mutable, weird values that they're obsessed with, like male manipulator music. Like these are all the noises that come out from that mindset in that generation. My kid's favorite movie is Ferris Bueller's Day Off because she wants to live that fucking movie.
It's fun.
Mia Sara's
it's like it's a story about a rebel who has fun. And
well,
like
Mia Sara has a kind of,
I feel like millennials, just as a cohort, because like they're kind of, especially in America, especially the white ones, they're just raised to be like these straight A students, and like Ferris Bueller is a great example of something that goes against the entire thing, where you're raised to want to be Hermione Granger, who does all the right things and follows all the rules and does the homework. Ferris Bueller's skipping school. He's got that cool car.
Yeah. And the thing for her is, you know, and I've said this before, my kids are biracial. And so for them, we live in an extremely white community. And so Mia Sara has this kind of like vaguely, you know, borderline, you know, non-white ethnic tone to her skin, let's say. And so that's a huge thing for her because she's seeing representationalism there. You know, it's a stretch, but like, you know, it's as much of a stretch as it is in her real life. Like I basically live in a John Hughes community, like 100%. You know, this town is obscenely wealthy, and I don't live in the obscenely wealthy part of it, but you are literally, if you grow up here, and I grew up here my whole life, you are potentially, you know, I was the Judd Nelson of my school, a breakfast club, 100% I was. And like, that was totally like known, that it was, there were flavors of it that were like, you could be a character. It was so homogenous, and there was so much leisure time, and there was so much, you know, affordable spending money. I could get money mowing lawns. It's like the guy from Dive used to talk about. He tried to, you know, dial back the suggestion that he was like a male model and grew up in this insanely wealthy town in Connecticut because he used to paint houses and mow lawns, man. Well, yeah, you can do that if you're painting a rich guy's house who actually doesn't give a shit and he's just going to give you $300 because he knows your mom. And that's kind of the flavor of the performative authenticity that you get when you totally grew up at the peak of like racial and financial privilege. And I see it's exactly like you're saying, because there's been so much passionate dialogue about diversity, you know, equity, inclusion, all these problems, these people are screaming out like their lives are fucked. Like redlining has totally prevented them from having the kind of physical wealth, prosperity, and safety of a town like the one I grew up in. But when there's so much noise about it, it's just like what you're saying. The generation that grows up being browbeaten by this is gonna overreact to it.
Right.
And they are.
And I mean, the other thing that's kind of bubbling up lately is like the whole idea of like indie sleaze and people talking about that. and that era is absolutely one of these pendulum swings. Because what was the 90s, but a very similar version of like this kind of browbeating. So once you're out of the 90s, once you're in a lot of this stuff was kind of bubbling up in the late 90s, but like once you get into like full Bush era and then like the nihilism that comes with that, and then also like the, you know, this like really just the Bush era is just a glory era for all kinds of sleazes. And like, so I think identifying this with sleaze is so accurate. Maybe not all the music is like fully sleazy, but like, you know, it's just, but it's a sleaze world, the sleaze energy through that period of time. And then like, you know, the pendulum.
Are you talking like, sorry, you're talking like Strokes into the Libertines, like.
Right. But I think even more like once you get into like the, you know, Justice and things like that, like it, and then I think there's kind of a pendulum shift, like kind of into the late aughts where Obama, like the Obama vibe shift, where everything kind of starts getting more twee or more like openly aspirational. It's like, or like all I do is win, 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 win. You know, things like that.
how
Yeah.
fast did this country like tighten its tie when Obama got elected? All
Right,
of a sudden,
and then also just like, you know, like all the indie stuff like suddenly shifts more towards like a twee energy
yeah,
or a sexless energy. So when I made
real
that
estate, dude, real estate.
yeah, I mean, so one of the things when I made that Indie Sleaze playlist, which is now my most popular playlist by a good margin, that was in response to another one, and I'm glad to say I eclipsed it, but like no offense to that person, but but I was doing a corrective basically because like their timeline, it was made by someone who was significantly younger than me. This extended way too far into the Obama era, and to me, like, oh no, this is very much a Bush thing. This is like I think the boundaries I had were 02 to 08, and then the Obama vibe shift starts in 08 and ends in 2011. But those are kind of overlapping things a little bit. But the whole point is like they had things like Vampire Weekend and Anima Collective in their version of this. Like, what are you talking about? That's like completely anti-sleaze stuff. Those are real like that's extremely unhorny music for one thing.
That's all.
Like, there's a real sexlessness that kicks into the music that gets bigger in the end of the decade. You know, Grizzly Bear, all that stuff, and like and look, I'm not even saying this to like diss that music. I like some of that music more than the other music, but it's like there is just like this overt sex vibe that's happening in the aughts, and I think that we're probably heading towards some version of this sleaze energy coming back. I mean, we're just due for like you just look at where culture has been the past period of time, and you can just almost kind of count on it swinging. And like the reason these things swing is not necessarily out of reactionary impulse. I think creative people, when you're just coming up and you're like, okay, I want to do something, what maybe you consciously or not, probably in most cases not, but the thing you're kind of thinking is ultimately, well, what's missing? What you're looking at the world like, what is happening? That's like, why am I not happy with how things are? Like, what can I do to like make the world more how I want it to be? I think that's what cultural people do, consciously or not.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, that whole thing, the vibe shift guy or whatever, you know, Carl's 2.0, I think didn't he call that period like the
well, that's a girl. It's a young woman, but yeah.
Oh, well, you're gonna have to edit that out.
I think very crucially this is young women because it's all coming out of because
the shoegaze thing,
right? Because ultimately, a lot of the way this stuff is being processed, and I don't really have a problem with this part of it at all, like where the Vampire Weekend stuff would start filtering into it, because you're not really thinking about time, you're not thinking about like genres, and you're thinking about just like a vibe. You're thinking about
right.
You're thinking about, in this case, I think you're ultimately thinking about American Apparel. Yeah. American Apparel becomes like, I would say the glory age of American Apparel is in the aughts, but American Apparel as a company has much greater purchase in the Obama period. Like, it's just like they've expanded all over the country. So it makes more sense why when you're thinking about American Apparel, you're walking in and they're playing My Girls.
Yeah, and that was the number one thing that took Pitchfork to the next level, was the investment from American Apparel. That was the number one advertiser at that time that made it. This is right after I quit. It was the number one advertiser that made them all the money. It basically was a brand share, big time co-investment focus. And, you know, the vibe shift, the author of the whole vibe shift thing and this person.
You mean the guy who who is basically coining vibe shift, like the guy,
yes,
the Substack guy, yeah,
yeah. And what I think they characterized that period as was music critic wave or whatever. I mean, it's something they called out the fact that it was all that was peak Pitchfork, that was peak, you know, Stereo Gum, that was you know, getting. peak Fluxpod, and it's us, you know, people writing shit that have become authorities in the music space that are new authorities. And there's definitely a you know, everyone's always talking about new canons every other day, but when I was talking about Numero Group and how there's this kind of, you know, refractive distortion that happens, when that happens in retrospect as a move to shake the kind of canon view of history, that's very disruptive. When it happens in real time, which is what the Pitchfork period was, that's completely natural. And so we did usher in, all of us together, and even Ezra Koenig in his blog days, we were ushering in new areas of focus and kind of curiosity. And that's the thing that's weird, because the new push for things like Chugi and all this other shit and the new vibe shift conversation, this all seems
ways of classifying.
It's all codification and annotation, and it just doesn't have any fucking weight in the real world, man.
Right, because I feel like what is happening, and I don't really feel super qualified to talk about fashion beyond like what I absorb from people who I listen to talk about this, like the Nymphet alumni girls, who are real finger on the pulse and thoughtful people about this. So I'm not really like completely uneducated. But the point being, like, it seems like so much of what is happening now is really just kind of a result of kind of a Pinterest board, Tumblr, post all of that, where aesthetics are kind of cobbled together from ideas, and you can kind of like make them into things that are real in life, like your cottage cores and all those kind of things, where it's like we've kind of cobbled together an idea and we're going to just kind of like test it out in the world and see if it flies. You know, I think that's a lot of that happens now.
How much do you think that there's an analogy to be made between that behavior and like having Slack channels and Discords? Like they want to put everything in a channel, like even ways of thinking and dressing. Like they have to have this.
Chris,
tag.
you know what I thought you were going to say? I thought you were going to say, how much is this like electronic music in the 90s and aughts?
Oh, it totally is that.
Because it's like we've come up with an idea for a genre. We have a cool name for it, and we're going to see, like, we're going to just R&D it and see what flies.
No, and it's the albums.
Because I don't think these are like bad or new impulses, but I think, yeah, there's a real analogy between these things. And right, and so like what's happening with like Discord groups and email lists and things like that, where it's like, okay, I have an idea for a vibe and let's just work it out. You know,
dude, the point about Warp and the 90s is so accurate, because it was so bad. The ideas and the conceptualizing was so far ahead of the content that you had multiple fake names for your bands. It was like you needed business cards to make this shit real.
But how many names did Luke Vibert have?
Oh my God. I mean, it's so dumb. Like Autechre, like they would just, people think Autechre is like
your
this
Aphex Twin is obviously the classic.
The OG. Yeah. But like Autechre, man, they were putting out some seriously make weight records that was like, we need more product so we seem like a major band. Like they were thin for a while, and all those artists have those periods where it's just like, you know, oh, Square Pusher came out, well now I got to make my, you know, my Square Pusher knob twiddling record, and you know,
or now I got to do my weird jazz thing.
D&B, here's my D&B, like, you know, jazzcore record. And
right, and like I feel like, you know, obviously there's ridiculousness to this, but it's also like, I think that's like part of the selling point of all that is like these people are legit. When people say experimental, it usually means nothing, but this is like legitimately experimental music. These people are trying things and iterating on concepts, and like a lot of it is this super conceptual and based around like, okay, the technology can do this now, let's see what we can do with it. And I think there's a lot of admirable things about that. But yeah, I think like what you're seeing now with fashion, with a lot of these things, with a lot of things where it's really just like, I have a concept for a vibe. I have a term for a vibe. Like I just mentioned like Nymphet alumni, and like they just did like maybe 3 episodes in a row, which was just like coming up with a vibe idea and seeing like where they could go with it, you know, or like what fits into this kind of concept. Like they're just talking about like a thing called like dark suburbia, you know. And I think that's like, you know, it's worth listening to, but like I think that their better episodes are really where they're talking more about like actual fashion as opposed to more conceptual fashion. But it's still interesting because it's like that you're kind of seeing in real time people who are smart and creative be like, okay, well, how about this? What about this? You know, like, and I mean, I have a lot of I have a lot of time for that kind of thing, but I think that's kind of where it is. Like, so like, well, you know, getting to an indie sleaze or things like that, cottage core, I think all these things, it's like you're just kind of looking back and you're kind of it really is leading with the idea of like the Pinterest board, you know.
Yeah, and I mean before, the way you would talk about this would be like, idea that okay, something is getting a groundswell, like when Freak Folk, I mean, also just like with TikTok, all of a sudden it's like we got to find all the Freak Folk bands, like, and go form some too, and like that. Remember that whole period, especially through the pandemic, there was tons of that shit going on in the early aughts,
fashion trends,
and then remember when shit gaze was like a thing. Viking for a minute.
out. So I think a lot of
there was like Times New Viking,
and
there was like there's some other band like and it was like they were so fed up with this pattern of like overexcitement about trends that they were like, oh, I'm going to make the anti-trend. And this cycle is just, it's always been there in art. But I think the biggest...
wait, go back. As like, did you just jump in after I stopped talking?
Oh yeah, I did. I was saying, if you remember,
I think the last thing I said before I was like, okay, it's time for Chris to talk, was I mentioned like the thought stuff.
Yes. And so
okay, all right, cool. No, it's like easy edit. Go.
Yeah, I was just saying, you remember when Freak Folk happened, and it was like, okay, not only is Freak Folk now suddenly a thing, we've got this groundswell, we need a whole bunch of bands we can hang this on. So why don't you just go like form bands and sound like this? There was that much market pressure for this to become a real thing, like a genre. And I think the difference, when the way you were just talking about it, what you make clear to me is it's the scale. Like when you had the joke of like shit gaze, right? That's bagging on stuff. It's like anti-culture jokes. And we've always had that, right? That's a reaction to exactly the kind of codification obsession that you were describing. And I think the differences in what you're noticing and noting is the scale of it and the ease with which, now that the internet and mobile and all of these utilities are available for people to play with this information and reorganize it in that Pinteresty kind of way, it becomes like kind of a different dimension of ideation. And
right. And I think it's also a way of participating without like necessarily being a model, having to wear clothes, having to make clothes, having to make music, having to play in a band, whatever. Like,
the flags are all gone for the clothes piece. That drove music for 50 years, was how you dressed. Now that's over. You can dress like a goth but no, I actually listen to, the like Taylor Swift. Like, it doesn't matter. There's
the obvious thing is like, well, how the rappers dress now.
Yeah, rap embracing femininity was the biggest push of the last like 10 whatever years. And I mean, like every other genre. Yeah, every other genre, there's bumps in the road in the way these things happen, but the maturity and the self-awareness in hip hop and rap has been, I think, super healthy and fun. I mean, you also have like Bobby Shmurda and stuff who are like like super direct and raw, but and there'll always be that tension.
I think increasingly it's like it takes all kinds, but
exactly.
I think we can wrap here. I think we've cycled through a bunch of ideas. I think we maybe have.
Yeah, I think you got a lot of good stuff, and you had much clearer ideas than I did, so I think it's all going to lay in pretty good, man.
Sweet.